Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming back after lunch. This is the session on IT security, on mobile security. A few people are slowly arriving. Welcome, Dirk. And as you can see some of the slides as you come in, just to give you a bit of a flavor of the Cyber Aware picture campaign, which has been running for quite a while now. How long has it been running? A year. We have lots of directors general and other people, important people like one of my head of unit, Greg Minkacevic. And you can be part of our campaign. I'll remind you at the end, but at the end you'll have an opportunity when the photographer is here to have a photograph taken with a comment from you, and your reward will be an extra gadget. So that's the information for the end already. I'll repeat it again at the end. So my name is Koen Ducatel. I'm Director for IT Security in DG Digit. And this is a panel on mobile security, and we have 4 excellent speakers. And the way we'll work the panel is I'll introduce the speakers, and then they will get an opportunity to say a few words themselves, to give an orientation on the topic. And then we will dive into a panel session, and you, of course, will have plenty of opportunity to ask questions. The topic is not just mobile security as such, but actually mobile security in the context of digital transformation. Now, in thinking about this topic, I think about my own business, and I would say, running IT security for the Commission, we're still mostly focused on defending the citadel. We have very, very effective, I think, with our colleagues running the operations teams, very effective abilities to detect and respond to incidents happening on our premises, inside of our perimeter. But probably we don't know so well what's happening outside of that. And that's not the future. The role of IT security is changing, and we have to adapt because the business is changing, the requirements of business are changing, and as you've probably heard this morning, even the Commission is on the path to digital transformation. So what we are looking at in this panel is how we as IT security players and experts can support digital transformation, what we see as the key challenges, and what we can do in order to try to make a digitally transformed enterprise or organization as secure as possible. And with that, I will open the floor and invite my first speaker, who is Claire Vishik, who is Senior Director, Trusted Technologies and Policy and Senior Principal Engineer at Intel. She has a long, long history in IT security. In addition to being a member of the EU EMEA stakeholders group at certain points, she has lots of patents pending in her name or already adopted. But what really triggers her, not only is collecting air miles. She told me, how many hundreds of thousands of kilometers did you do this year? 500,000? Yeah, 500,000. Is actually bringing that global multidisciplinary approach, and the key thing for her is taking new ideas and putting them into practice, into reality. So Claire, I'll hand you the microphone, and you will give us a short concept of where you think mobile security is going, what the challenges are.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. When you work in security for as long as I have done, you become sort of a generalist. You looked at everything: ideation, design, deployment, maintenance, retirement. You looked at technology, policy, users, and everything in between. And from this point of view, I would like to put mobile security in the context of broader things, because I think it's impossible to work in this area successfully without understanding this broader context. Well, we only have a short time to express our ideas, so I will give probably 4 areas that I think are important from this general point of view. The first of them is the intrinsic complexity of both the environment, the computing ecosystem, and the subject of cybersecurity. Both represent some kind of a challenge, especially for mixed fields like mobile cybersecurity. What is this intrinsic complexity? We certainly have a very diverse computing environment. We have a number of different devices operating over different networks in different countries under different legal systems. We have users prepared and not prepared, expert and novice that leave the domain and then join a new one and then yet another one. So how do we deal with this complexity that really does not have a permanent model other than with the concepts of risk that are always somewhat subjective? We don't yet know. We understand that there are multiple domains that we need to unify, but we don't understand how. We understand how to measure security for one component or for one model, but we do not understand how to create composite security metrics, how to combine all these measurements into a new one that describes, for example, a whole device or even a whole domain in an ecosystem. This is complicated, but it's necessary because all processes today are multi-domain. All the processes today require that we learn how to deal with this complexity, how to create composite metrics, how to create more complex models that anticipate security in a better way. This will also allow us to deal with unexpected consequences, underlying consequences of new situations, new use cases appearing. Well, think about mobile phones or related technology that had been possible a long time ago but only became operational recently, software-defined radio. Why was it not possible? Why was it difficult to create a smartphone? Well, the main issue was really the battery. Of course, we needed low energy consumption in the devices, but we also needed miniaturized, more powerful batteries in order to make all these resource-intensive operations possible. But this also opens up the space for additional attack surfaces, ones that we do not yet understand, yet ones that we need to consider. And if we think about the subject of cybersecurity and look at broad definitions, for instance, the one that you could find at the US CERT website, you will find that it includes everything: psychology, technology, international relations, law enforcement, economics, and a lot more. It's not unusual that new subject areas are so broad. However, cybersecurity has not yet learned to incorporate concepts from adjacent subjects in a coherent way. It just tries to study everything, and that makes it so difficult for us to create models that anticipate future events better. So that's one area, and probably the most important, that we need to consider. The other one, we shouldn't forget about fundamental technologies. Yes, when we look at how everything looks today compared to even 20 years ago, it's very different. We use technology in every activity that we engage in the developed world, be it education, be it medical care, be it transportation. Technology plays an exceptional role, and connectivity is essential. But the foundational technologies haven't changed. We still use the same ideas to operate computing, same as 50 years ago. We still use the same ideas to operate networks. And in fact, a lot of our data still travels on the old copper networks. Certainly optical networks were not built everywhere. And the list can be continued. So as we look at mobile security, we certainly need to think about those technologies, the legacy technologies that have not changed, that support the newer technologies that were created on top of them. The third area I think is important is interoperability. Well, it's a great thing. It's a great thing especially for a researcher like me who had projects such as convergent networks or unified messaging or things of this nature. But while it's clear that the importance of interoperability was a game-changing factor in today's technology environment, it's also clear that there is the dark side to interoperability. When we put several frameworks together, each of them with their own security model, what happens when those frameworks meet? We don't know. We don't know how to anticipate it well. We don't know how to compute it well. And it's something that we need to learn to understand. The fourth area that I would like to mention is cyber-physical systems. Well, everything that's connected is a cyber-physical system. It has a computing component. It has a cyber component, something that connects to the internet or another network, and it has some kind of physical subsystem. However, when this physical subsystem is a computer case, we sort of know how to deal with it. But when it is something else, something that we have not studied in great detail, be it a medical device, be it a smart meter, be it connected jewelry, or a connected car, or a nuclear power station with some connection to the outside, then it becomes really complicated. Then it becomes clear that it's impossible to consider security separately. We really need to consider at least security, privacy, and safety together in some kind of integrated metric. And perhaps we should also add reliability and resilience. Each cyber-physical system will include a different combination of those areas: privacy, safety, security, reliability, and resilience, but they probably need to be considered for each. So how can we make sure that we create favorable environment to deal with those complexities? Well, again, 4 areas. We certainly need to look at the untraditional, unclear abilities of and capabilities of new technologies. Well, for instance, we need to see how we can use blockchain for data integrity or something of this nature. Once we understand how to solve adjacent problems, we will gain a lot. At the same time, we need not to surrender ourselves to the buzzword of the day, something that is new enough that can solve all the problems without a lot of common sense and a lot of anticipation, a lot of comparison with what we have already studied. We need to inure ourselves to unintended consequences of what we do and create models that anticipate and take into consideration these unintended consequences. Is it energy efficiency? Is it the ability to use additional resources to support security? Is it something else? We certainly need to deal with it very early in the process. It's especially important for mobile security. And finally, but the most importantly, it's the user. Everything that we do is done for the user. Security needs to be created in such a way that there is no impediment to the user's normal activities. It has been proven time and again that when something takes more time, more effort, and it's connected to security and privacy, a workaround will be found. It's also true that in order to make our security activities effective, we need to make them simple. We need to make our devices show whether or not they are sufficiently secure based on very fundamental issues. We need to make it transparent to users to take advantage of security and privacy as much as they can. This will be the most fundamental, the most important issue of our times. Of course, awareness is important, but so is training. In order to understand what's happening on your device with your data, you need to have some level of expertise. This generation has started using devices and services without this expertise. But the next generation should start very early as they begin to use devices, so that they become expert by the time they are adult. Expert in a common sense, like we are experts to drive a common car. But this is something that needs to happen, and I hope it will. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Claire. So the second speaker is Koen, who is CTO for cybersecurity at Atos. Koen started off as a developer a few years ago now, and along the way he's become somebody who sits in the bridge between the technical and the managerial, and has a long experience now of IT security. So Koen, please, a few words.
Good afternoon, thank you for having me. First of all, security, it's the emerging practice for the last 20 years. When I started my career, everybody said to me, security is a hot topic. 20 years later, I still hear the same message, which is, of course, it's good, but it's also bad. We must realize that what we have been doing in the past wasn't so good. We failed. To call it very bluntly, we have never succeeded in security, and I hope this change in thinking and culture and new technologies like mobile security combined with cloud computing will bring a positive change, and I believe it will. We are now finally thinking differently. Instead of protecting the citadel, as Ken called it, or protecting the infrastructure, we are now putting it towards more data-centric and user-centric security, which in my opinion is the road that we need to follow, because when our kids will come to work, I don't think we will hand them over a mobile phone and a laptop. They will bring their own things like we already start doing, and by then they will have perhaps implants as well. Who knows where we are going. So we need to think about data and not controlling these devices. That is a lost cause. We will never be able to be able to manage it and secure it. So we need to think about how we are going to protect the data. But if you think then one step further down, we also would need to understand what is behavior from a user. How do users act in a normal way instead of focusing always on what is bad, and the bad that we know and we call today known bad. Stop fixating on that. I mean, we have been building these models for years where we focused on prevention with a massive load of prevention tools that you have stuffed into your perimeter. It was almost an addiction. The most complex tools, the better our security was. At least that was what we thought. And now we have to conclude that it didn't work. So we need to think differently, and I think that different road will be, as the previous speakers already said, it will be oriented towards users, and awareness is one part. Instead of building a castle, we need to train knights, but we are training the knights, but that's not all of it. The knights are also, from time to time, not as attentive as they should, and then they fall into a trap. So how do we recover? That's the next step. We have been spending too much money and time on detecting and eliminating the evil from happening, and when it now happens, we don't have an answer to it. We fail in providing adequate response, and we fail in monitoring and detecting it in due time. So my plea would be in that direction, applying machine learning and artificial intelligence, and start knowing what is normal behavior before we pick up our bad addiction that we had and fixating on the known bad. And on that note, I'll leave the mic to our next speaker.
So, thanks very much, Koen. So, Andrea Radu is the director of cyber risk practice in Deloitte. She's a computer scientist, been a developer as well. And she's also, we give a plug to this, a key player in the Women in Cyber initiative of Deloitte. And this is something very keen on doing, is getting more women into cyber because it's a really attractive place to work. And she is somebody who likes to put the big context, the wider picture, collecting the dots is part of her passion. So Andrea, please connect some dots for us.
Yes, sure. I think in terms of the connecting dots, we heard a lot about complexity. We heard a lot about failure in security. So I think, and yeah, how can we manage this in the future? When bringing it back to mobile security a little bit, I also have a complementary perspective on what the previous speakers have said. So we have to look at the data, and not only the data that is on the devices that we need to protect. We need to look at the data that the devices would get access to. We need to look at the data, well, the availability of the devices themselves, as a lot of us are using mobile devices to do our work on a day-to-day basis. We also need to look at the integrity of the data itself. We can think about the data that is shared without us knowing from the mobile devices and the information that comes back based on that. And then we also need to think about the actions that those devices can take on our behalf. I think when it comes to the threat landscape, the threats overall are very similar to what we see in cybersecurity in general. So we talk about ransomware attacks, we talk about exploitation of vulnerabilities, we talk about targeted attacks in terms of specific threat actors wanting to start attack campaigns. So the threat landscape is not much different, at least on a high level, than the overall cybersecurity, which leads me to believe that mobile security doesn't need to be looked at only from the perspective of mobile security. It needs to be looked at in a wider context. And then, as Koen mentioned, looking at not only at the detective, the preventive capabilities, but also from a strategy perspective and also from a recovery and response perspective. I thought before we came here, I thought about a parallel story which, makes me think that in terms of failure and changing things, maybe we can change the story. And in that perspective, if you think about the story of the Sleeping Beauty, where you had the queen and the king giving a big party in celebration of their newborn, which is the most precious thing that they have in the kingdom. And then out of a sudden, you have the 6 good fairies and then an evil one, which was forgotten and nobody knew about her or wanted to know about her. So she casts a spell on the princess. The princess finally gets her finger pricked in the needle of the spinning wheel, and then she falls into a sleep for 100 years until the prince comes and kisses her. So now, what does this have to do with cybersecurity? I think if we would change the story, if we would think about the evil fairy as a threat, and if we would think about really understanding it, including it in our party when we want to celebrate the most important and critical thing in our organization, then maybe we would be able to change the story. Maybe we would be able to create better capabilities, focus on the right things, and have the impact of the 100 years of sleep of recovery less or even non-existent. So in that respect, that's my conclusion, that we can change the story.
Okay, so Markus, you have to follow that. So Markus Braendle is CEO of cybersecurity at Airbus. He has 15 years experience. He has a background in computer science. And he told me before the session he's a developer, he's very technical, but then he took a wrong turning somewhere or other and ended up in management. But that means he can speak both languages, and I think he has some very interesting perspectives on this particular topic.
Okay, so actually I was listening to you guys talk, and there's a couple of things that kind of jumped into my mind. One was the definition, I think, is Einstein, that said insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different outcome. And when I was listening to you, I was kind of wondering, are we insane in cybersecurity to some extent? Because we've been doing it for quite a long time. We're trying to apply some of the same principles to different domains. And one of the things, when you talked about Sleeping Beauty, I had to think of my 3 kids. I have 3 kids, 11, 9, and 6 years old. Is how they go about this whole topic. I mean, try to explain to my 6-year-old that she cannot watch Netflix anytime, anywhere, no matter what. Right? She is purely mobile for her. She doesn't understand that you can't just take an iPad or an iPhone and have it accessible anytime, anywhere. So also, this morning, the keynote speaker talked about we have to think about the day after tomorrow. So when I put all of this now together, what it sort of means to me, if we take now an approach in trying to tackle the mobile challenges, and take cyber awareness as an example, and we say the solution is going to be, we're going to wait for the future workforce to start their first job, and then we're going to run them through a cyber awareness training. Then we're insane, because then we're doing what we've always done, which is too late. And I think, Claire, you also hinted at that. I think, we need to really think about the day after tomorrow, which is, today's kids, who will have a completely different mindset and approach to mobility and mobile devices. And we need to start, really instilling some cyber hygiene, some cyber first aid into their brains right now, because otherwise we will always be behind the ball. And what's also interesting, if I look at my kids, my 11-year-old, she now has her first iPhone. I always said she's not getting one until she's 18. Guess I was wrong there as well. But the way she uses it is actually, it's very amazing, because, on the one hand, they use WhatsApp and they chat and they send pictures to each other. So they're very open, and privacy is a little less of a concern. On the other hand, every time she installs a new app and one of those pop-ups comes, she comes and asks me, she says, "Dad, what does this mean? Does that mean one of my pictures could be seen by someone I don't know or don't trust?" And if I say, "Yep," then she says, "Then I don't want it." So, and I haven't, put that in her brain, but it's a different way of looking at all of this. So again, I think if we want to escape this insanity of doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different outcome, maybe we really need to also force ourselves to think outside the box. So that's maybe one of the key messages. The other one, for me, all of these topics, mobile security, cloud security, you name it, it's all about risk management. And that's, for me, the most fundamental thing. We always need to look at risk management. Claire, you talked about cyber physical systems. In my previous role, I was faced with discussions about should we put applications that allow to control a nuclear power plant onto an iPad. And my view was maybe not. Maybe that's not the smartest idea that we could have. It's a decision of risk management. So I think we also need to look at a lot of these things in terms of risk, in terms of what are the benefits from having access all the time everywhere versus some of the risks. There's a lot of things I think that we can do mobile, that we can do very well and we can also secure. There might be one or two things where we might just want to say, you know, maybe a good old-fashioned computer is the better working environment. So, you know, that for me is also a very important point. And I made it just the last quick thing is also, I think one of the challenges with mobile is also because it combines so many, you know, different things. Because, you know, mobility also means we typically, you know, we sit at an airport, we connect to whatever Wi-Fi we can connect to because we want to be online. And then while we sit there with our mobile phone or tablet, you know, we switch forth and back between sending text messages, being on LinkedIn, answering corporate emails, and all of these things. So it becomes kind of a melting pot of everything together. And I think there's studies that show people are 3 times more likely to click on a phishing email on a mobile device versus on a laptop or a desktop. And I think it's also because you're not in a different mindset. You know, you're at the airport, you're doing a little bit of work, you get a text message, you do everything together. And, you know, because of that, you also probably, you know, are quicker to, and, you know, this was said this morning, to click before you think. And I think we need to make sure that we really think before we click.
Great. Thank you very much. So I want to go through the discussion in kind of 4 steps. The first one I'm going to look at is a bit, are we doing the wrong thing in trying to protect the devices and making them as robust as possible? So infrastructure. The second one is the data, the application layer, you know, whether or not we can actually get control over that. The third concerns the kind of the awareness and the user end of things. And then the fourth is I'd like, if one of my experts, panelists, has a comment on it, to also think about the attackers and how the attackers are actually using mobile to get at us. This is, you know, paranoia is part of my professional deformation. Let's start with the first one. I mentioned at the beginning, you know, a lot of our assets in the Commission, I think, in IT security are around hardening devices and detection and monitoring in relation to the kind of the fixed physical perimeter, hardening devices when people go out. Is this a lost cause? I mean, who wants to speak on that? Markus?
Holding the mic, so I guess I'm going to start. So I think 2 comments to that. I think purely focusing on trying to secure the infrastructure is probably not the right approach because the infrastructure keeps changing so fast. So we need to have a more agile approach as well, because otherwise we will always be a step behind the ball. And the second thing is, actually I want to pick up on something that Koen said as well. It's, you know, yes, we need to try to protect the infrastructure, but we also need to get a better awareness, visibility into our systems, what's actually happening. And we do actually see a shift, right? I think a couple of years ago, only about 15% of IT security spend was invested in detection and response. Gartner predicts that by 2020, 60%, so more than half of IT security budgets will be spent on detection and response, right? Which is quite interesting if you think about it, because it also shows that I think we start to realize, as you said, you know, we fail keeping the bad guys out all the time because they do get in. So we also need to invest more in trying to understand what's actually happening and making sure we can respond very, very quickly. So I guess my answer is, you know, if you put all your money into trying to protect the infrastructure, probably not the best strategy.
I think protecting the infrastructure and hardening the device are worthy causes. They certainly improve the situation. This is not something that can be or should be eliminated from the big picture. We probably should consider a more flexible ways doing this. Typically, a hardening model is something that has been defined with a lot of effort, exists for a long time as the infrastructure and the devices change. I think those changes should be taken into consideration much more as the models are devised. And I think that there should be a better way to deal with catastrophic attacks. I know everyone is taking it into consideration, yet we don't have a good way to deal with some of the attacks specifically because we invested so much into hardening. Something to consider. You already have it.
Yeah. Oh, it's a lost cause in the sense if we think of the old concepts that we still are addictive to, then we are lost, of course. But we need to think a bit differently, and some of us call it the zero trust concept. You don't have to trust any device anymore in your network. You know what to trust. Let's say your corporate machines, servers as they are called, those you can trust, of course, and put into dedicated zones. But myself as an employee, you shouldn't trust me. I have to prove every time again who I am, what am I doing, why am I doing it, and then I get the access that I should have to do my job. But there's no need to protect my device. I mean, I'm sensible enough to do that myself, and if I bring my own disaster with me, then of course I should be sensible enough to try to protect that device. If you can't do that, then you take the corporate machine, and that has protection mechanisms on there. But the goal is, we live in a zero trust environment today. There's no such thing as a local area network. That's gone. It has vanished. When we destroyed the castle, we destroyed the zoning and the land concept with us. So everything is untrustable until you prove differently. And that is a concept where we need to work on, especially in mobile.
Nothing necessarily to add on that. I think I completely agree, as I found myself in a conversation with a head of IT of a small company, however still an insurance company, where I had to explain to him that indeed the fact that he knows all the people in the organization doesn't mean that he needs to trust them. And that measures need to be put in place. And he felt completely uncomfortable at the thought that I would imply as a stranger to his organization that he should not trust the people. However, the idea is not about trusting, it's about not knowing what you don't know. And that's the main challenge that we have in cybersecurity.
Yeah. So Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. Then if you go on to the next step, and Andrea, while you've got the mic, maybe you keep it. The issue of have we lost control over our data? Because using mobile, the data is out there, it's traveling with people, it's mostly lodged in the cloud. We see more and more of our assets being in the cloud. And it's difficult to imagine that we really know and can fully protect the information and the data that people are handling. Do we have a way of actually managing that transition that's happening?
You chose the difficult question, right? I think the data question is a complex one. I don't think there's a yes or no answer. There's just an answer related to the processes on how we manage the data. We need to have an understanding, an early understanding of what data we hold in an organization and what we want to do with it.
So, because I'm worried about, we could invent lots of governance arrangements and so on, but who knows what's going to happen in reality? Because I'm in big favour of kind of governance, good governance, but it's difficult to make sure it's actually implemented in practice. Koen, you have something to say on this, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, I think the opportunity is there to get back into control. I believe that if we go to solutions like cloud, that we finally have back control. Do you remember the days that you had to connect with that awful device that we call a modem and start beeping at night, and then you had to start your VPN connection and try to retrieve that silly PowerPoint presentation that was too big to get it over? Now these days are over. We have a central repository, and you may call it cloud or whatever it's called, give it the name you like, but at least we can control that data that goes on there and leaves that area. There's no need anymore almost to store data locally today. I mean, that is great. That is absolutely fabulous. I work for organizations and I need 0 data on my own device. That's a great story. So finally we can get back into control of that data. And in addition, this cloud story has also a bit of a negative side effect from time to time, because security and privacy, the lines are getting blurred today, especially with GDPR, which I believe in, but of course it's difficult to maintain in a global world. But we have now the opportunity to do it once, right? Please seize that opportunity.
Yeah, we're migrating in my mind towards also the role of the user. We'll get there, but it seems to me that mobile devices using the cloud, and I think you're right. My worry about cloud very often is cloud deployments are not necessarily under control. It's the new shadow IT. But mobile devices are also bringing together private and personal use and professional use into one device, and you bring your own disaster, bring your own device thing it's not necessarily clear that these are things are fully secured. So it's kind of a challenge, isn't it? I mean, doesn't it raise the complexity, the point that you were talking about earlier?
Absolutely. I think when we talk about data, we talk about what is considered personal data under the most common definitions. And we also talk about static data, data in data sets. And this makes the problem still complex, but much simpler than it is in reality. So think about the real scenario involving your smartphone. You are trying to, you are making an anonymous charity contribution from your phone. So once you start your phone, your service provider already knows exactly who you are, where you live, what kind of plan you have. So you don't have any privacy and they sort of control your data. You don't exactly know how. When you proceed and make a credit card payment to the charity, you use a payment service where they need to know who you are and they control your data. They could be located in a variety of places. In between, different clouds are used. You don't know what they are. And once you are passing from your telephone and its PDP context to the TCP/IP context of the site where you want to be listed as an anonymous donor, well, again, it's very easy to understand exactly who you are for the service provider or data center owner. And it's only in the last stage that you have full control. You are indeed listed as anonymous, even though all along the process, those who needed to know and those who didn't knew who you were. And that's in conjunction with the data that you supplied. In addition to this, there was a lot of machine-to-machine data. The data that flowed between your device and the access point and the base station and the network and the website and so on. So I agree with you that in practical terms, unless you limit the problem to a certain type of data, data that is static, data that is maintained in a certain way, cloud probably does not help you a lot to control it. And you certainly don't have most of this data on your device.
Markus.
Sorry, I'm actually going to challenge you a little bit on this, because I think the ways of working are just changing, and we talk about mobility. We also need the way, really, and I think I agree with what you just said, Koen. I mean, cloud allows us to really, and security here is the enabler. It allows us to have the data centrally somewhere. You can have very thin devices, you can have mobile devices, and you still have access to the data, but you don't need to have it on your devices all the time, which is a big advantage. From a security perspective, because even if a device gets stolen or compromised, doesn't mean that the data is immediately also stolen or compromised, because you still have that somewhere else. And cloud is such a buzzword, like, just like big data and blockchain. It can mean anything and nothing at all. I think if you put your data in the cloud, first of all, you need to understand, and again, it comes back to risk assessment. What are you talking about when you say cloud? Is it a private cloud? Is it a public cloud? Is it a hybrid cloud? And then when you say you want to put data in there, it's a question about, okay, so how are you going to manage that data? Are you just going to throw it into a public cloud, into a repository, and have a very simple access control mechanism? Or do you actually underpin this with a proper data classification schemes and some technology support, which is available these days, to really then also make sure who has access, from where, when, and all these things. I think there's a, it can of course feel very overwhelming, if you draw the cloud as a cloud and say now everything is in there and I have no clue. But I think there's a lot of technology available today that allows you to understand, where that data is, who has access. And again, it comes back to, not just trying to protect it, but also putting mechanisms in place that you can track who has access, when did they access, where is the data, and then again, to what you said, identify anything that's outside normal behavior, right? Why is Markus accessing this data Sunday at 5 a.m. in the morning, right?
So what you're saying is, in practice, the kind of the role of the IT security guys like me, is shifting from laying down the rules and compliance and things towards being much more agile and providing a kind of a very rapid monitoring of the overall threat landscape, but not just in-house, but actually how you project your data and your visibility into this new world.
I think you have to, and I think to some extent that's not even a decision that we can make. That decision has been made for us by the people that come to work for us now. Because if we as organizations don't provide that way of working, that cloud access and mobility, they will just do it themselves. They will, create their own cloud somewhere so they can share information. They will use their own instant messaging services so that the young people can communicate. To some extent, again, this is not even a decision that's up to us. This is a decision that's been taken for us by the people that come to work for us now. So either we can get on board and try to leverage the technology that's there to the best possibilities, or we will just be completely overrun.
So this is IT security as an enabler rather than a roadblock to digital transformation, which I think is the target, is the big challenge that we face. So let's get to the third part of my plan, which is, okay, users are expecting, our bosses are expecting that it's all going to happen. What can we do in terms of raising awareness about what they should be doing to protect themselves in this new world? Maybe we start with Markus.
For me, the most important thing is make it tangible. So if you do awareness, if you do trainings, it has to mean something to the individual. And if you just tell them, if you don't do this, then bad things are going to happen and someone hacks into a server somewhere, that's not very tangible. So I think we need to use examples where people can relate to, whether that's in their private life or whether it's in business, but in terms of a business language. I think if we continue to do cyber awareness or cyber training and use a very technical language, and we talk about things like APTs and vulnerabilities and these things, most people who aren't geeks like us can't relate to that. So if we want to be successful, we need to tie it to something that people really care about, so that they're also willing, because cyber is always a bit of a trade-off with usability and convenience. So in order for us and the users to be willing to give up a little bit of usability and a little bit of convenience, they need to see the benefit, and that benefit again needs to be tangible to them, I think.
Okay, Andrea.
I completely agree with you, Markus. I think besides awareness, we need to think about culture, and we need to, when we think about cultures, the difference between culture and awareness is that on awareness you talk about the what can happen, what are the bad things, how can you protect. Whereas when you think about culture, you think indeed about the why. How does it relate to me? How does it relate to the greater purpose of the organization that I work in? And also overall, at the global or greater context, how does that help? When it comes to relating to the personal things that can happen to you, I think there's a lot about unconscious bias that we need to think about. If, for example, I would ask you, would you be more afraid of a shark attack or a cyber attack? The answer probably would be a shark. Shark attack, okay. A shark attack, okay, because that's personal to you, and you would be immediately affected by the shark attack. If you then change it, what would you be more afraid of a shark attack or a heart attack? Would it be a heart attack, maybe? And again, because it relates more to you, then the probability of you having a shark attack at this moment, it's much lower than...
I think shark attack and heart attack go together. I don't think I can have
Maybe a heart attack without the shark attack. We actually, this is a really good moment to introduce Vincent Henin. Stand up, Vincent. He's the guy who's writing a kind of a graphical story here, and we won't get it immediately, but we will get it in the next few days, where he tells the story of the shark attack and the heart attack, I assume. All right, thank you, Vincent. Koen.
Yeah, I can only second what has been said before, of course, but when I started doing those awareness campaigns, it was, and this is a long time ago, it was a lot about this is how you should do it. It was imposing almost rules and don't click on this, don't do that, make a password like this. I think, of course, those days have changed. We need to think more about what do I do when something happens as well? And that is something I miss in many of these campaigns today. We see a lot of effort going in the prevention mode, but what do I do when I'm infected? Who do I call? Should I ask a colleague before I click on something, or should I use his computer to click on it? That's also of course, that's also a possibility, and I've seen that. When you leave USB devices unattended near coffee machines, people pick them up, of course, and then I saw the USB device going the entire floor because we were tracking the device. In every PC it went, because every time it was plugged into a PC, you saw it hitting up a website. So, of course, people do those things. But you need to tell them, well, first aid, we learn it in real life. Why don't we have cyber first aid? It would be very helpful for many of us. It's a simple thing that we can do to help people providing first aid, so that these poor guys of the CERT team or CERT team or whatever they are called, they have different names, but that these poor guys have a bit of a rest. And another thing to create that awareness is those users responsible for creating havoc in the network, put them a week into the CERT cave. Now you see how you make your colleagues suffer. That creates a lot of awareness. We have tried that in the past. That works. Who works in CERT here? Who is incident responder? Imagine that you now see the faces of those creating all that work for you. That would be great, huh? Revenge is best served, and you know the rest. So.
I'm not sure all my CERT team will want to actually have these guys sitting in their offices, to be honest. It's a bit like the old joke about, first prize is 1 week holiday in Manchester, second prize is 2 weeks holiday. Claire.
Well, three things, and I'll explain the second. Start early. This is self-explanatory. As early as you begin to use devices, make it easy, which I will use to tell a couple of short stories, and create the right incentives. It's also self-explanatory. Now we have negative incentives for failure. You might have to pay to decrypt your data, or things of this nature might happen. You might be penalized within your organization, but there should be a clear structure of those incentives. Now, make it easy. Recently I received one of those calls about how my router was breached when I was in London. And I was curious as to what I was going to be told by this organization organization that was performing those malicious calls. It was a telephone call. They were very well prepared. They made me run a few CMD commands on my computer. Well, I knew what was generated, but a person who didn't certainly would be impressed by their proof that my router was breached. Then they asked me to download something to clean my machine. And when I asked them, well, why, even though they were calling on behalf of British Telecom, the domain was entirely different, they explained to me that it's easier to perform this from third parties. They had a very logical explanation about why this is better. So now let me tell you a couple of stories about how difficult it was to be a good guy. Well, I am always beta testing new things. I was an early user of Windows 10, and there was an issue with processing of some encryption mechanisms for connecting to wireless access points. So I reported this, and I was told by the first line of defense that kept sending me to always level 1 support people, just the new ones. I was told by them, well, it's a problem with your service provider, which of course was clear to anyone with minimal technical knowledge that it wasn't. Well, once in the course of a project, I noticed that a major newspaper that I'm not going to name here was sending password back in clear text. Well, I reported it to the newspaper, and I was told that I might be prosecuted for noticing it. Well, to justify do some justice to the newspaper, they actually did correct this simple error within the next 2 days. So, well, you know, we have malicious players that are so well prepared, and we have the good guys who are finding it so difficult to find answers to their questions, even the ones who are seeking those answers professionally. So I think making it easy actually will make a lot of difference.
Okay, good. So we have a few minutes. I can open the floor to maybe somebody who wants to ask some questions from the floor. No hands going up. There must be somebody out there. Yes, Liliana, I can see. Stand up and introduce yourself. We have to give you a microphone.
Thank you very much. I'm Liliana Mushatan. I recently joined Digit on Friday, basically, in security. And I have a question for Markus, because you mentioned IT security risk management, and we are very interested into that. And we'd like to know what is your best experience into IT security risk management across maybe partnership with the institutions.
So risk management, you know, for me, it's one of the topics that's very dear to my heart. And I'll start with my previous role. So before I joined Airbus, I was the head of cybersecurity for ABB for 6 years. And at that time, I was very fortunate because I had 2 CEOs, first Joe Hogan and then Uli Spieshofer, who really cared about cyber and gave me the opportunity to really present cyber in the boardroom. The challenge that I had was I knew I was going to have, you know, the first impression counts. So you have 15 minutes and you go in there and, you know, how do I present this topic of cyber, which was pretty foreign to the entire executive committee, so that they understand. So the first thing I did is I spent some time understanding what are the normal risk management processes and what are the risks, the typical risks that our organization faces, and how do I link cyber to those risks. So how do I compare cybersecurity to the other risks that they deal on a daily basis? So my advice for risk management, whether it's with the institutions, whether it's in organizations, is always you have to put cyber risk in context of all the other risks an organization face. You need to use the same language, you need to use the same metrics, because essentially you're asking the decision makers to be experts from cyber, which they're not. But they are experts in understanding the risks for their organization and taking the right decisions to minimize those risks. Again, if you present it in a language that they're familiar with. So again, my advice with regards to risk management and cyber is always don't treat cyber as a special topic. Make cybersecurity part of overall enterprise risk management discussions using the same frameworks, using the same language, and using the same metrics. And that's not easy, by the way, sorry.
Okay, so there weren't any other urgent hands waving around. We're running out of time. Oh, yes, please, very quick one then, because I don't want to keep here people, and I've got a special reason not to keep you here.
It's very quick.
Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Cesare Tortonese. I work for Digicom as a local informatics security officer in Italia. Now, I don't know how much this question applies to all of you, given the fact that you have diverse backgrounds, but it seems to me that to date the greatest answer, about the only answer that I know of for cybersecurity on mobile devices has been encryption, use of encryption. Encrypt your data. Unified instant messaging things usually come with encryption. Encrypted emails are promoted at the corporate level. Now, at the same time, I happen to read by experts that at the end of the day, encryption is as effective as long as you can keep your device safe, avoiding, for instance, that your device sends screenshots of what you see on your display, because that will clearly make encryption useless. Or at the same time, I'm told that WhatsApp promotes very intensely the fact that the conversations are encrypted end-to-end, but it seems on the other side that as the encryption key is stored locally, it can be easily stolen. Now, in your experience, have you ever actually heard of attacks of this kind by actually copying a local encryption key or having installed some rootkit of that kind that would actually pass images of what appears on the display of the device to someone else? Thank you.
It's what they did to Telegraph, isn't it?
Not in that exact way, that encryption keys are stolen, of course, that is pretty common, unfortunately. Due to bad management, there are devices to overcome that issue. So if you go into mobile combined with cloud, one golden rule is not to hand over your encryption key to the cloud provider. That would render it not useless, but it's dangerous. It's a bit like putting your front door keys under the carpet in front of your door. Don't do that, of course. So there are devices to overcome that. Encryption is a solid way of protecting your data, but everything stands with the management of the encryption keys. And of course they are stolen. It will not be the first time that this will happen due to bad management, and the same will probably come up more and more when we are connecting OT environments into the evil world of internet, where there is little encryption, where the operational parts are unprotected. Of course, we will need to think about it again when that is coming. It's slowly coming, but it's not there yet.
Okay, so I'm going to do a very, very final, very, very quick set of takeaway points. Before we get there, I want to do two things, a little bit of housekeeping, to announce that we carry on with the sessions. I think it's on the first floor, the demonstrations after this session. So we have a cyber demonstration by the guy in the hat at the end. Stand up, please, Carol. So if you want a cyber demonstration by this guy at 3:30, he's going to show you how he's going to own your mobile device. And he also has lots of advice on other things, such as the question just answered. And also we have a presentation, I think, at 4:30, is it, by Guillaume from the Parliament. And the presentation will be on election hacking and protection against election hacking. So thanks, guys. Please assist in those. And follow the hashtag DIGITEC18 on social media. And what I'm going to do as the final round is just to ask Claire, going through to Markus. We've got the digital strategy. We're about to adopt it. It's the European Commission's version of digital transformation. My boss, Gertrude Ingestad, is really concerned that we now do the hard lifting of making sure that the strategy becomes life. What's your one-line message to Gertrude on mobile security?
Learn from your past mistakes.
Focus on knowing good.
So digital transformation is about the running and the delivery of the business of the future in a safe way. So it's actually discussing about the safe parts that always get forgotten.
Cybersecurity is the enabler for digital transformation, not the showstopper.
Okay, so remember we have Christoph here with his camera, and he's willing to take photos of you, and you can get a free gadget. And you just give your slogan for our Join Our Picture campaign. Daria, is there anything I've forgotten? No? So thank you to Daria and to the other colleagues in setting up of the session. Thank you to our panelists for their insights and their contributions. And thank you to you for spending part of the afternoon with us. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.